And today we have the opportunity to speak with Nicolas Tenzer, the non-resident senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis and chairman of the Center for Studies and Research on Political Decision, author of Our War, Crime and Oblivion. Hello and welcome.
Thank you very much for receiving me.
Greetings. So John Kirby, National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications at White House, has commented on the recent violation of the airspace of Latvia and Romania by Russian combat drones. This is unfortunately not a new development, as it happened over the course of the war in Ukraine, where missiles, fragments or drone fragments sometimes catch up in the combat in the air and land there. So White House has not taken attack by Russian drones falling in NATO countries as a serious one, and NATO countries have not shot them down. What do you think about that?
First of all, I think that the reaction is quite weak because that's, not the first time, as you rightly recall, that a NATO country itself is targeted by Russian missiles or drones, even if not intentionally, but I think that was not completely, hazardous if those drones, fall in those kind of countries. Because that's a kind of sign, because Putin is really trying to test, the readiness of the allies and the resolve to take very strong decisions. For the moment, it seems that the NATO country, especially under the leadership of the US, say, well, we don't react very strongly. There is probably a temptation for the US to say, well, we cannot because it will be too early to trigger Article 4 or, of course, even more Article 5 of NATO Treaty. But in fact, that's a clear signal, in my view, that if the US and the allies in general are not ready to dissuade Russia when it is attacking Ukraine, then I think the credibility of NATO itself, if Russia is attacking NATO countries, could be put into questions. And from my point of view, that could be a very dangerous move not to react strongly to this kind of attacks.
And that tendency is very frightening. It's very frightening if Russia tries, God forbid, to attack Baltic countries or Romania on land. What will be the answer of NATO? Maybe it will be too early to answer as well.
Of course, that's part of the deterrence game. There must be some unpredictability about the reactions of the allies. That's key in terms of deterrence. But there is also something that I quite often say, which is that basically deterrence is not about nuclear deterrence. That's about conventional deterrence. It means that if, of course, the allies consider that they are mostly protected by the nuclear shield, I think basically, it's not the point. The real point is the US, mostly the US, but also the other allies, namely the UK, Germany, France, and the others. The most capable country to strike back, ready to take conventional measures against those Russian attacks. In my view, that should have been the signal sent when Ukraine has been attacked, I would say not only after February 24th, 2022, but already in 2014. If Russia attacked Ukraine, even if Ukraine is not, it will be soon, I do hope, a NATO country, it put into questions the legitimacy of NATO itself. It means that when the Russia is attacking Ukraine, in fact, it put in jeopardy the NATO countries themselves. So it means that basically the resolve of NATO, the credibility of NATO is not only tested when you have attack on Latvia or Romania, etc., but even if it's Ukraine that is targeted. And from my point of view, what we are witnessing since 2.5 years especially shows that there is a true, I will say, retreat, I mean, that's the right word, of NATO in terms of duties, not because of the organization itself. Let's be very clear on that. You know, what I put, into questions is not the General Secretary of NATO, nor the NATO stats, not the NATO military commands. That's not the point, because basically they are civil servants and they cannot take action without the approval of the NATO Council. So it's basically the major allies, namely the US, that, in my view, haven't yet understood that if they don't take immediate measures, probably the deterrence itself will be threatened for a long time.
And you see, one particular country is shooting down Russian drones. It is Belarus. And I'm afraid that this decisiveness of Lukashenko, an ally of Putin, to shoot down Russian drones in Belarusian airspace will further reinforce anti-NATO and Eurosceptical moods, right-wing moods in Europe, because they see that, oh, NATO is not acting as the big brother, it is not protecting us, and the countries will further rely on their own domestic policy, and NATO could simply fall apart because of that.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's the right point. I think you have, of course, a lot of Eurosceptics that are saying, well, what is NATO for, or what is the EU for? Because you perfectly know that also the EU has a duty, according to the Article 42.7, to defend the allies when they are attacked. And I think the question of Belarus is rather interesting, because we perfectly know that Lukashenko regime, survives only because of the protection of Russia. We also know that there is the project of Russia to deploy nuclear missiles, into the territory of Belarus. But still, Lukashenko, who is a dictator, who is repressing, its own people, try always to send some signal that he is not fully allied on Russia's position. And there is a clear fear of the Belarus authorities also to enter into war against Ukraine. That's also an interesting point, in my view. Of course, it doesn't mean that we must not protect, the Belarusian people. Certainly, we must, and we know the ambiguousness of Lukashenko. But it's also an interesting point, an interesting signal. If Lukashenko is doing something that the NATO allies are not doing by themselves. What I do hope, I don't expect, to be very clear, I don't unfortunately expect some changes, until, the last minutes of Biden's term. But if Kamala Harris, is elected on November 5th, what I do certainly hope, the true questions, and of course opposite views on that by very good US foreign policy experts, is to know if Mrs. Harris will break with disastrous, in my view, Obama's and Joe Biden's legacy. Because certainly we know, the abstention of Obama after the chemical attack on Ghouta in 2013, in Syria, that basically gave a clear signal to Putin that he has a free hand to attack Ukraine in 2014. We know that the withdrawal of the American troop from Afghanistan in 2021 was as well a clear signal to Mr. Putin that he could attack Ukraine in 2022. So I think that Kamala Harris will be certainly well advised if she considers that this kind of restraint, let's say, policy basically has failed.
That is a very deep analytics. Thank you for that. And we are very grateful for you being here, and really, really insightful view into 2013 and 14 and 2021, 2022. I was thinking about that too, about Syria and about Afghanistan that led Putin attack. That is quite a rare insight, and it is very pleasant to hear it from you, Mr. Tenzer. Thank you again.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.